Wow, it's all going to go downhill from now. All right. Good morning.
Hi.
Good morning, Jeff. Okay. So I'm Jill. Who are you? This is what I need to figure out. So I think many of you are from community colleges.
Yes.
Show of hands. We're in a classroom. Oh, okay. K-12? K-12, that's nice. Both?
Both.
All right. So she's gone, but I have to thank Lisa for inviting me. While I'm in another college, I often do things with MENAS, Middle Eastern North African Studies, partly because I think they're the most political, the most edgy, but also the most practical in having these kinds of workshops. So what I think I want to do today, inshallah, for the next 50 minutes, I'm going to break it up a little bit. So I want to just tell you give you some basic stats about refugees. I'm not sure. Then I'll move very briefly into a study that I've been doing with Iraqi refugees, just as an example, and then I'll get to Arizona and do some stats for that. I will make this PowerPoint completely available to you, so I have it. It's very, unfortunately, for Saturday morning. It's unfortunate that we're here on a Saturday morning, but it's also unfortunate. It's just very content dense, so yeah. You can pay attention in and out. All right. Okay. Oh, I also just need to contact me for anything. You can get a hold of me all kinds of ways: text, Facebook message, Twitter, whatever. And I need to thank Julie Casper, who I'll tell you about at the end. She's a great resource. She runs Center, which is a hub for refugees here in Tucson, and she let me take 12 of her slides. So, that was very valuable. Can you hear me? Okay. All right. So we'll start by just talking about refugees. Okay. So just some terminology. Right, so we often lump asylum seekers and refugees in together, and unfortunately the public media also lumps immigrants, and they just talk about them all together. So you'll often see the Syrians coming, and they will call them, immigrants. They are one subsection of immigrants, but I think it's more accurate just to call them migrants, which is a very broad term. They are on the move, but there's a difference. So do you know the difference between asylum seekers and refugees? You feel okay about that? Okay, right. So one comes with a legal status of refugee. Asylum seekers do not yet have their status until they either get to the border or they're living in their new country. Okay. Got your photo? Oh. Okay, good. Yes?
I was wondering, what are it says recognized as refugee by United Nations. What does the United Nations, how do they decide that, yes, you
right.
are refugees?
And you are not, yes. Let me go through a couple more slides, and if it doesn't get covered, I want to come back to that. So in this time of, I know Dr. Nassar last night, she was very polite. I'm not. In fact, when I'm at MENAS, I try not to curse. But I think when Donald Trump talks about extreme vetting processes, you will see it is already so extreme, right, in order to get that label. Okay. We shouldn't start politics so early, right? So here is just the legal definition of a refugee. And only recently has gender been added as a social group. So for a long time, gender was not included. Right? They just call it social group because they don't write about sexuality or gender because, that would be too much. You can sit in the front.
No, there are 2 seats here.
Or you don't have to. Okay. All right. So here, I think this gets to your question. What was your name? Andrea, okay. So what happens when people flee? Something crazy, horrible, awful, violent, traumatic is going on in my country. I go, right? So if I'm going to try and get refugee status, I usually try and cross a border to a neighboring country, and usually you end up in a refugee camp, right? So, but they're often, again, subjected to violence, trauma. Women are raped. And unfortunately, there are protracted situations. Now, before refugee camps were seen as just a very quick, get your papers and go. Now the average time that families spend in refugees is 10 years. For North Africans, Sudanese, Somalis, Bhutanese, the average is 17 years. So you can raise and have your children and raise in a refugee camp. And I'll talk, there's many reasons why that's problematic, but I'll talk about why that's problematic for education. So there's three possibilities when you flee. The greatest hope for most refugees is that things in their country get better and they can go back to their country. The second thing is that they are allowed to stay in the country where the refugee camp is. So in that first video we saw that woman and her family could have possibly stayed in Iraq. That very rarely happens. The third one is that there's a third country resettlement, and that's how they come to the U.S. Okay. So I'm going to go through a bunch of stats, and since I'm an anthropologist, I just want us to remember that these stats we're talking about people. Okay. All right. So, can everyone see these? Okay. So this idea of 65.3 million, it's very difficult to know. Right? This is a constantly changing number. And so if you're a mathematician and a stickler for numbers, you will see that in many of my slides, the numbers aren't going to add up. And this is partly because depending on where you get the source. And I can give you places to get sources. But this number, 65.3 million people, this includes people who are internally displaced. What that means is they flee, say you live in Phoenix. You flee Phoenix and you are hanging out in Douglas waiting for whatever's going on in Phoenix to end. You're internally displaced. You're not a refugee. You're not an asylum seeker. But that's included in this number. In the refugee number, I don't know if you can read it, but this also includes Palestinians. So there's a little bit more than 5 million Palestinians. We often forget to talk about them.
Is the 65 million just political, or could it be natural disaster or some other kind?
It can be natural disaster as well, yes. Mm-hmm. A natural disaster, and usually by the time these numbers come out very slowly, is that nothing, is that me? Nothing has improved in 6 months from the natural disaster. But that is right? Are you guys okay? I feel like I turned this way a lot. All right. So this is 2014, because again the numbers are lagging. I don't know if you know, but right now the United States and the Obama administration has made a commitment to have 10,000 Syrian refugees this year. This is a dramatic increase, because for 3 years before we got a whole 1,800. So he's determined to do that. It's a political year, so I'm thinking he's probably going to do that. So these numbers actually are much higher than they were in 2014. But what 2014 marked was, can you guys see, was a record number for a single year. And so you can see that Syria, has 11, almost 0.6 million, Iraq 4, right? And you see this region, the Middle East, what we call the Middle East, has just the largest number combined. Again, can you see that? That's pretty awful. That's an awful one, right? Let's just move on. Basically, this gets to your question a little bit, right? So you're living, something happens, whether it's natural, but it's usually political. You forcibly are removed, evacuated, or you flee. You end up in some in between. That's usually a refugee resettlement camp, but not always. As you've seen on television, a lot of times they make makeshift quasi-camps, right? So there, you can start to apply for a refugee status. So this is very difficult because you have to have documentation. Okay, first, not only do you have to document where you were born, who you are, all of the idea of all of your family members, which if you're fleeing from something, I don't know, I always think, what would I grab, right? Yeah. So this is why, I'm not a big security person, but this is why it's good to have a backup of everything somewhere other than your home. In the cloud, but then be careful of the cloud, because Okay, so there you get a medical screening, then you get interviewed multiple times, and it's kind of sad. The sad thing is they interview everyone, even little teeny kids, and you're separated. So you can be a 3-year-old in a camp being interviewed. Yeah, they are looking for resonating stories. Okay. And unfortunately, little kids tend to, not unfortunately, but they tell the truth, right? But the interviewers, there's been cases shown that they tend to then use that against the parents who have maybe had a slightly different interpretation of the situation. Okay. So from there, then their paperwork goes in, and we have several, the Department of Homeland Security, I have a slide that shows this, and then they go to the Citizens and Immigrant Department, and so all of these people have to vet them in order for them, and their medical stuff, in order for them to even be ready to come. Then they have to actually have a country to go to, and I can talk to you a little bit about what that looks like. All right, so here's the diagram of, this one's a little bit of a mess, but so it shows you the refugees. It also shows you the asylum seekers. So asylum seekers can be we put them into different categories. So some come on a visa and then they apply for asylum. Some don't have a visa and they request it at the border. And then some come as students or on a vacation and they don't, or sports, and they don't leave, and then they apply. So there's just different terms. I don't know if that's important to you guys or not. Okay. May I go on? Yeah? Okay. So this one actually gets to mostly what you're talking about. And again, I don't know, when Lisa comes back, I'll make sure that you can have this PowerPoint. So you should, yeah. Okay. So there's been a real change in the refugees that we have been getting. And since 2015, you see that this is where they are from. And then Syria and Iraq have really moved up. We understand why that is, but I'll talk about it a little bit. Okay. So this is from the Pew Research. So this shows a little bit of the origins that have shifted, but this slide is so weird to me, and because they put the Middle East in with Asians. So the green, I have a pointer. If you see the green, right? So that includes Middle East. I'm not clear why, because earlier there weren't Middle Easters. So it looks like there was more before, but those are not. That mostly in the beginning. That's from Vietnam. Right? Okay. You guys are so quiet. Are you okay? Feel free to interrupt me. Really. If I'm overwhelming with numbers, say break, and we'll take a break. So I think many of you are interested in the Middle Eastern students who are coming, and so not that all Middle Eastern students are Muslim. In fact, many that come are Christian, and that's why they're fleeing. But here's to show you the Muslim population, and clearly it's gone up, right, in the last 4 years. Okay. This is just to give you, I am not great with geography. This is a region I have learned. So just in case, so you can visualize it, this is what we're talking about. These numbers on this are interesting. But so it goes back to your question, right? They're waiting to register. They have not, they have their paperwork going, but they are waiting to actually register as refugees. So at this point, most of them are what we would call stateless, who have no state.
And why can they not register? Like, what's the hold up there? Just the number?
Is the vetting process. Oh. Yeah, the numbers, but also the vetting process. So I guess it's this is an awful slide, I'm sorry. So this is a good time to talk about. So how do they decide where they go? So a lot of people think they get to choose. They do not get to choose. In fact, it's a bit of a lottery system. And let's say the United States, at the beginning of the year, the administration says, we will take X number of refugees this year. And you know what? We're going to take a few thousand from this country, 10,000 from this country. Right? So they commit to that, to the UN. But then it's up to what we call voluntary agencies, or VOLOGs. So you will know places like HIAS, Hebrew International Aid Society. They were responsible during the Holocaust for bringing people. Catholic Charities. So these are the groups, IRC, International. And they say, okay, well, you know what? We can take 10 of those 1,000. No, we can take 20 of those 1,000. And you know where we're going to put them? 3 criteria. We're going to put them where there are already other people of their nationality. We're going to put them where it is cheap to live. And we're going to put them where there are low-service, entry-level jobs. Okay, I mean, I don't think they say it quite like that, but yeah, that's what I'm saying. Anyway, so that's why I used to live in Buffalo. I used to teach in Buffalo, and that's why we had a bunch of Somali refugees in Buffalo. You're from Minnesota, right? The largest population, right? Now I got to think, like, that's not probably where they were thinking they'd like to go, right? I mean, it's lovely there, right?
Especially in the winter.
Exactly. So in Buffalo, they would often be wearing flip-flops and walking to SL class. And, you know, like, it's a conundrum. It's frostbite. All right. So Arizona. This surprised me. So I moved from New York to Arizona. Don't ask me why. It's not. People get very upset. No, for a job. I came to work at the university. I wanted to be closer to the border work. And so when you look at this, it looks like Texas, California, New York, and then Arizona. But actually, if you do it per capita of our population here in Arizona, we beat California and New York. So congratulations to Arizonans. We actually, despite what Doug Ducey thinks, that we take in more refugees per capita than everywhere except New York. And most of the refugees in New York right now go to upstate New York because we got right? So they're in Utica, Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester. Okay. I'm sorry, the left side it gives you all the states. And it's just not a good slide. But in the privacy of your own home, you'll be able to watch this. Okay. You can binge on my PowerPoint. So, okay. So this is just for half a year. So October 2015 to June 2016 is the last numbers I could get that I felt were reliable, even enough for me. And you see we brought 2,400. Oh, I'm sorry. I keep touching my microphone. And do you know where most of them go? Phoenix, right. So I told you about the VOLOGs, the national institutions that agencies that say we can take this many. Then they go to their local affiliates, right? So here in Tucson, we have Catholic Charities, Lutheran Services of Southwest Arizona, and IRC, right? And they say, well, okay, we can of those 100 that you're committed to taking, we can take 15 of them. So that's how it gets to the local level. And so that fluctuates over time. What is difficult is refugees do not arrive on a schedule in a linear fashion. So you can have months you don't get very many, but because the end of the year is really October for the commitments, we will get more refugees from now until the end of October than we have the entire rest of the year. Because there's a commitment for the 10,000 Syrian refugees and the U.S. is not even close, you can expect many Syrian refugees to be coming to Phoenix. Yes?
I just have a question about the VOLOGs. So who determines how many refugees VOLOGs can take? You're talking about...
The VOLOGs decide.
Okay.
We can take this many. It depends on funding, staffing. So each refugee is kind of like kids in K-12. They run around with a little price tag on their head. Depending on if they're emergent bilinguals or special ed, their price tag gets bigger, and they carry it from school to school. All right, that's part of our idea of choice. It's the same with the refugees. That VOLOGs get a certain amount, it's usually about $5,400 something. Yeah, that then they get then to take care of those refugees for 90 days, and then we'll talk about it. Then the refugees are supposed to be off on their own. I think I better hurry. Hold on. Okay. So the ones with the asterisks, that's for Pima County. Okay, those are our highest numbers. I love your fan there. Yeah, Barack. Okay. All right, so I just want to take a break because for me, this stuff just really is sad and depressing to me. So yeah. Any questions just about the general process? I have to admit, I wasn't clear if you knew all of this already, so I just wanted to put it in. Yeah?
In Phoenix, we had the Catholic Charities come and present to us about a year or so ago.
Mm-hmm.
And they said that once someone goes to Phoenix as a refugee, they try to get them a job. But if they have family in another part of the United States,
mm-hmm.
they are actually free to move.
Yes. Secondary resettlement in a third country is what it's called, and they often do, and they will help them with that process. And that makes sense, right? To me, like Arizona, we are unfortunately all about separating families. They really do try and reunite families. Can you imagine? I mean, all your social ties are torn. These may be the only people that you know left alive. So yes, we do. Everything is done to reconnect them. That's why many end up in Minneapolis, even though that's not their first stop.
Yeah, so is anybody studying what happens to like sub-Saharan Africans when they move to a cold climate and how they have to change their...
Yeah, so this is interesting because most of the studies are coming out of Minnesota or Portland, Maine. They have a big Somali. Yeah, but the funny thing that they don't talk about is the weather, and I don't really understand that. You need to talk about the weather. Yeah, right? Yeah, so that's a great study if any of you are interested. Yes?
When the refugees come from a camp and
Yes.
registration of various complete, is the age 18 where they can be separated from the family and go different ways? Because you said like all families come together.
You know, I don't know of any instances where that has happened. It would have to be, I don't know what kind of circumstances that would be under, but what does often happen is they get separated when they're fleeing. So you have unaccompanied minors, you have 18-year-olds, and also who knows? I mean, we all have families. Sometimes you don't want to be moving around with your family, no matter how bad it is. And so at 18, they can actually request, although again, it's not their choice, right? It's not their sole choice.
Because I've had students who have like a brother in Germany, a sister in
Yeah.
Australia, and all of
It could also be the times they flee and what camps they go to. Yeah. Okay, so we got a breath. All right. So I just want to move into refugees and education, and then I'm going to actually focus most on college. If the K-12 people, I have lots of information for you if you want it. I'm happy to send it to you. So although we know that education is incredibly important for social mobility and long-term well-being, humanitarian aid actually doesn't include education. Okay. So the Refugee Resettlement Act of 1980 basically says, in much better words than this, is that the responsibility of the resettlement agency and country is to get this person economically self-sufficient as soon as possible with the minimum amount of English necessary. So this is a key. Right? So we are pushing the refugees out to get jobs, giving them an introductory, maybe an intermediate ESL class. They get jobs. We all know what happens when you have a job. You do not have time then to be going to your community colleges to take right? To do that. So it really, I write a lot about how we resettle them into poverty, and then we make sure they'll be there for at least another generation. Right? Prior to that, those of you at community college, you know that if you haven't had a primary, secondary education, it's very hard to go to college. Most of them have not. First of all, the refugees as a whole, not just Middle Eastern, 76% get a primary education. We would call that elementary school. Right? 36% get a secondary. Now, if you're a female in African or Middle Eastern countries, that number goes down to about 20. Yeah, 20%. And then they're coming and to get into college. Right? So we see this very disrupted. We often talk about in K-12 SIFE, interrupted formal education. This is beyond. I don't even know what you call it. SIFE plus. Anyway. Okay. So resettlement. Resettlement agencies do a great job that they can of offering initial ESL classes. Here we have Pima County has adult ed, and they offer it. But again, and we'll talk about what are the barriers to even partaking in those services. Refugees and college. This is it's called the Iraqi Student Project. And this project targets Iraqi students to get them into and then fund them throughout and then for them to complete. So when you get this, I tried to put all the links in so that when you get the PowerPoint, you can click away. Okay, so I just want to tell you a little bit, and I'm going to keep this short. What I've learned about Middle Eastern cultures and college in a study with Iraq refugees. So I should just go back a little bit. So I started working with refugees in 1995 in a TRIO program at South Seattle Community College. I love community college. I feel all warm and fuzzy when I think of community college. I do. It's just the right kind of place. The goal is the right goal. And so at that time, though, most of them were Hmong, Seattle also. And so I started working with them. I was blown away. Okay. So over time, whatever I did, I went to get my doctorate. And my early work, the Making Failure Pay, is basically how companies like Kaplan, Sylvan, yada yada, many others, right? How they make exorbitant amounts of public money, your tax dollars, when more kids fail. So they have a big chunk and a big investment if kids fail, like under No Child Left Behind or ESSA. It used to be mandated you would have to get tutoring. And where do you go to the tutoring? To these private companies. So, but I've always kept a hand, and the main thread of my research has always been with migrants. So I worked with the children of migrant workers in California. Then I worked with undocumented students in New York City, and refugees for like the last 6 or 7 years. I feel honored to work with them, so it doesn't feel like work. So very quickly, I'm not an expert on the Iraq War, although I think no one else in the government is. So, we went in, we invaded in 2013. We very rarely talk about all the people that died. That includes civilians as well as military. 3.3 million, that's a conservative number, have been displaced, and only of those, 370,000 have been granted refugee status. So this number at the bottom is controversial, and I'll tell you why. But so between 112 and 118 Iraqis, the government on one of their websites has up to 40,000, but then they have a little caveat that says this number has not been verified. I don't think it's been. Yeah. You okay? All right. So in the U.S., so 1 out of every 5 Iraqis that was born in Iraq that is here came here after 2000. This makes sense, right? I include this 2007 because nearly 2/3 of Iraqi immigrants that came in 2007 were adults. So they would be the people that you would see, right? That has gone down, and now it's about half youth under 18. But at that point, okay, the men outnumber the women. And greater than 1/3 of those actually that come to the U.S. live in metropolitan areas, including the Phoenix, Mesa, Scottsdale area. It's a huge hub. If you ever see a map with the concentrations done graphically, you guys are doing great. Okay. So very quickly, so this doesn't matter so much probably to you. Anyway, my study is a large multi-year ethnographic study with the main, starting just from this main place. So I think people do really cool things, and they learn a ton, and kids especially, and they find their way when it seems almost impossible to find their way. Then we adults create situations because of policy and accountability where, we really stifle that and make all these conditions in which they can fail. So that's how I approach things. So my study was looking at how do refugees create and access networks that are rich in resources, whether that's finding a doctor or a dentist or moving to a better apartment. How do they do that? Right? Especially if they're a newcomer. So that's what I studied. There was about 128 refugees were part of it. And but what happened was, as I started interviewing Iraqi refugees, many of them came with special immigrant visas, SIVs. I didn't know what those were at the time. Do you know what those are? Okay. So those are visas if they can prove, and it's very difficult to prove, that they worked for the U.S. government or an ally. So that can be anything from a driver to a guide, to an interpreter. And so there's 2 programs that they come under. There's a 2008 program that is just for those who have worked for the U.S. government during the war. And there's a special one for translators and interpreters. Okay. In the first few years, so starting in 2008, not many were coming in. It's so difficult. You have to have people in the military write letters for your service. You have to document that you had worked for a year, and it's a very arduous task, honestly. So up to date, about 18,000 have been admitted to the U.S. Okay, there's several groups that have been working since 2008 to get more and to bring this to light. Although there's not much in the media about it. So the groups are the Iraqi Refugee Assistance Project, and they offer legal aid. The list is a former USAID worker started himself to try and help them get their documentation. And then there's a group of Iraqi military vets who constantly are lobbying the government. Okay. This program, I'll say, has ended now, and so they can no longer come in on special visas. They can come in through the regular channels that we talked about. So I don't know how much we want to talk about this. So these are just some quotes from my interviews in my study. Would you prefer I read one, or do you want to read them yourself? I'm saying you're going to read them yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Maybe has everyone read one? I think I just got to move through. So the desire to attend college. So in my study, overwhelmingly, the Iraqis wanted to attend college or work for the government in the same kind of position, like as a translator, as a guide. And in fact, as you're looking, I'll just talk, as you're looking at these, honestly, many of them thought that they had been promised that. So this is where MENAS comes in for me. I gave a talk here 2 years ago about some initial findings from this, but I was very unclear, and I'm still unclear. Like, did I get it right? And there was a gentleman the student who was an Iraqi military vet in the audience, and afterward he said, you know who I think you need to talk to? You need to talk to the military subcontractors. I think they are the ones that are promising this. So that, I don't know if I should thank him or not. We've been in contact. So that extended my study until 2005 and 2015 because I wanted to get it right. So, you may have guessed I'm not Muslim. I'm not Middle Eastern. I'm like all tattooed, pierced. Right? So I feel hesitant talking about these particular populations and sharing their stories. So I really need to get it right. Okay. Right? Inshallah. All right. I'm not even at all a believer, so that is even weird. And so, many of them, if they couldn't go to school, college, which they understood, it might take some time, they thought they would be able to work for the government. They had worked for the government for years. 0 have been employed because of 2 things. You need to have a birth certificate, and you need to have 3 things: U.S. citizenship, and you need to pass a security check. None of them. And honestly, the people that are most upset about this are the vets that they work side by side with. This has been very upsetting for them. Okay. So the 42 Iraqi men, which are a subsample of those, they want to improve the lives of their kids through education. Many of them want to go to college. They are happy to go to community college, but then they would like to get advanced degrees. Community college often is the place that is most accessible to them, and community colleges, to all of your credit, tend to partner with refugee agencies much more tightly coupled than the university. Again, many of them thought that it was all going to be paid for. Yeah. Okay. So they interviewed 14 Iraqi war veterans, and 12 of them thought that there should be a separate like GI Bill for ones who had served with them, and that was really hard for them to understand, right? And the one that stood out to me was a young man, and he said, it doesn't make any sense. We have the GI Bill, and most of us are too screwed up mentally to go. And here are this group of people who saved our lives, and they have nothing. But what's the reality of that? They all want to go. So I should say, too, the Iraqis that I said only had been in the country a year or less when I began. So, but by the end of the study, only 5 of them were actually enrolled in a community college or a university. And 4 of the 5 felt very discouraged that they had faced discrimination and racism. And this is in upstate New York. Okay? And they said they felt that partly because of things that were going on, actually, like people would look at them and things, but also everything in the media. So I don't know, like New York City is a very liberal sometimes, but then upstate can be really quite militia. We know what that's about here. Anyway, 8 of them, however, with the Iraqi war vets, were actually filling out FAFSAs, which I'll talk about that a little bit. And by the time of the end of the study in 2015, actually the community colleges and the 2 universities that were located had made formal agreements with refugee resettlement agencies to create new pathways and funding. Okay. I don't know, I just like that picture. And so what do we know? They have great aspirations, right? And in recent studies, the younger group, the 18 through 24-year-olds, have even greater aspirations than they had before for college, and this is great. Limited access, of course, we understand that, right? And that, unfortunately, is truest for females. The barriers. So even if they have met the prerequisites to come to your colleges, what do you name some things? What's going to keep them from coming? Work, time, transportation. Yeah, right. Mental health issues, physical health. I mean, it can just go on and on. One of the things that has been most troubling is that they will have documentation of getting degrees from universities in their country, and they are not recognized. Because, we're so much better here. Okay. So what about Arizona, which is, I think, probably what I was supposed to. So Arizona, we have this very mixed response, right? So you have Ducey, who is joined with, I don't even put like his title. We have Ducey, who's joined with other governors across the country saying, no, we're just not taking any Muslims. I think we'll just only take Christians. I don't really get that, but okay. And also there's been an unfortunate equating of Muslims with terrorists, which is why when the young man, college student, that Dr. Nassar talked about last night, said inshallah, was removed. So yes, that could be a policy, and she was very kind and thoughtful in saying it was a policy. I would call it xenophobia and racism. Okay, so that's why I get to be an anthropologist and why I couldn't work here. Okay. They let me come visit, but only for a little bit of time. All right, so you know better than I do the legislation in Arizona. I've only been here 3 years, but it is anti-bilingual, SB 1070. It's oppressive. Yeah, I know. You're about ready to have a bust back there. You're having a heart attack, right? I know. Okay, so actions. So there has been two very different responses, and probably lots of things in between. There has been a welcoming of Middle Eastern refugees in Arizona. I've just it's warmed my heart, honestly. It's made it worth it coming here. And then we've had several armed, actually, anti-Muslim demonstrations. So, we get it all here. That's good. Okay, but this is the main thing. I want you to have this, and I want you to have this link. Refugees who have refugee status pay in-state tuition. People will keep telling you that they do not. And then you just need to point to this law. They do. Okay? That changes things a lot. They also can get Pell Grants. With $5,000 Pell Grant, they can more than pay for their degrees at your institutions. Okay? Did you guys already know this already?
No.
Yeah, I think it's very controversial and not known, and it's maddening. Okay. So, we talked about the ongoing challenges and barriers, so I will not do that. But, so as they come, and as if we all do welcome them, what can we do to increase their opportunities? So, let me show you a few things here. This is, if you do watch this is just a small video. I won't play it. Essentially, it's a woman talking about, if she could talk about what she wants, a certain refugee, she wants peace. She wants peace and education. And that's what she wants for herself and for her kids. And beyond that, that's it. That's what she wants in the U.S. So I think it's a lovely video. But okay. So here's some things we can all do. We got to check ourselves, right? We all have biases, fears, prejudices, and just kind of some unknowns. You're here today, and you were here yesterday. I'm pretty sure part of that is figuring it out, right? How do we really feel about this, right? The second thing that I think K-12 has not done a good job of, not for lack of some people trying, we don't study like global issues. We don't look at social movements in K-12. I work with principals mostly, right? Like that's kind of been, well, that wasn't tested, so it's not tested. It's not happening, right? And then all of a sudden, Arizona instituted a civics exam to get out of high school. That, by the way, is the same civics exam that the refugees have to take to become citizens. Yeah, it's a memorization. Okay. Anyway, so learn more about global issues. Learn your geography. Develop a critical consciousness. So we like to think, okay, you're here now. You're with us. It's so much better here. Yeah. Educational institutions have a way of sorting people, right? And we need to acknowledge that. We are part of that system. Okay. So I don't know about you, but I love to just engage with people from other cultures, races, and religions, and just like wow, it's a lovely, rich experience here in Tucson, as I know it is in Phoenix, and I've had a great time in Douglas and Bisbee, and so You know, I'm still in that like, oh my gosh, look at Jerome. I haven't been here that long. I've just been here 3 years, so I still like every weekend go to somewhere and go, oh, there is a lake, Patagonia. It's not a lake. Anyway, all right, get involved. You're here. I got to think you're already involved, right? Stand up, act as an advocate. First of all, it feels so good, but also it's just the right thing to do. All right, and it's one of the reasons I moved to Arizona, because I think it's more important here than it was in New York, where everyone was like saying the same thing that I was saying. All right, and gather resources. There are so many resources. So how many of you work in Pima County? Oh, I mean, yay, but okay, I'm sorry. So I'm gonna offer you one source, and it happens to be in Pima County. I am happy to connect you with the sources in Phoenix as well. So the center. It's a long thing. Collaborative engagement to nurture talents and educate responsibly. I can never quite keep it straight. It's in downtown. Oh, that's really awesome. Oh, nice. Okay, so they have programs for 12 to 24-year-olds. So we do tutoring, mentoring down there. It's a drop-in study place. We make movies. We have dance club. We have Arabic club. I'm learning soccer. I suck at it. And this week, our language of the week is Swahili, so Jambo Rafikis. We have a career exploration. We take them to the Pima Community College. We take them to the University of Arizona. All of these things. I am so really sorry. Okay. And I volunteer there, and I'm on the board, and it's right across from the Linda Ronstadt, or the Ronstadt Family Bus Terminal. All right. Oh, look. That's nice. Okay. All right. We also, though, have programs for adults. So what we are finding here in Tucson is the group that's between 18 and 24, it's just hard. So they come, and we put them in high schools. Can you imagine that? Like that's just, for so many reasons, not a good idea. It's awful for them. They're marginalized. So you're a 24-year-old sitting next to a 15-year-old. It's just, it's not a good fix. So Pima does offer some adult learning classes and some GD. What we would like in Tucson, and I say we, there's just a bunch of us that work with refugees, to have some type of alternative high school and GED program that is not online sitting at a computer recovering your credits. Okay, no. And so we would love to have that, because we think that space could really be an important space for that group that is going to be the next generation to change the family's life. So there are some at Center. These are the programs for adults.